dog wash.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our March 14th, 2016 work session. Work sessions are a more informal setting to update the council on business items. No votes will be taken on work session items. Tonight we've got 4 items on our agenda. Public comment is allowed that is germane to an agenda item. And if you wish to speak, you must fill out a public comment card and turn it into our city clerk. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. The council can change that if we have more folks that want to be heard. Public comment will be heard at the beginning of each item, and once the item is called, no other public comment cards will be accepted. Sudie, do we have any public comment cards for item number 1?
Not on number 1, sir.
Okay. Tonight, it's an honor for me to introduce Patrick Burke with Fulton County School System and Katie Reeves, our elected official on the school board, to make a presentation to us. So we appreciate you guys being here.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We really appreciate this opportunity to present this evening. We've kind of made it simple, so instead of listening to me talk, which I know is what you're used to seeing, we've actually produced a little video that tells the public a little bit about what our upcoming capital plan includes and a little bit about it. And I'll come back and end with just a few comments.
Fulton County Schools Capital Plan 2022 will align capital resources with instructional needs to foster learning and achievement across the district. We want to ensure that we provide every opportunity for our students to thrive, and providing them with the resources and proper environment will help us to achieve this goal. Our school district has grown by 35,000 students over 2 decades. That's a lot. As a result, we have overcrowding in some of our schools. To ensure that we have capacity for our projected high school population, we need to build cost-effective high schools that also offer tremendous opportunities to our students. And here's how we will do that. To accomplish this, we will build STEM-focused schools that do not require all of the amenities of a comprehensive high school. These schools will offer a lot of flexibility and innovative programs for students.
So as we engage business folks throughout our community, through our local chambers, we understand that there's a need for students to be studying STEM-focused careers. And they need to have that exposure early in their lives, certainly starting in elementary school. But when they get to high school, they really need some substance to what it is that they can learn in those health-related fields, in those fields of engineering, science, technology, math. So we're very excited to be planning 2 STEM-focused campuses. These programs are going to give kids great opportunities to not only get a great education, but to take a great focus on careers that we know not only our community needs, that our country needs, but is going to provide these students who are in these programs just a bright future, not only with just a very promising job market, but also with a great wage so they can live a great life. So we're very excited about it.
Beyond the STEM campuses, we are planning for 1 new elementary school in South Fulton. We're also planning an additional school or equivalent capacity to address needs as new residential development impacts our schools. In addition to new construction for enrollment needs, we also evaluated our existing facilities for their condition and educational needs over the next 5 years. 4 schools were identified for replacement renovation projects, as 60 other schools will address other critical needs. A number of our high schools will receive additions, modifications, and renovations to address deficiencies in the educational adequacy or to provide expansion of instructional programs. In addition to normal building renovations, we will also replace field turf and track surfaces at select high schools, provide upgrades to select middle school media centers, and replace playgrounds as part of our ongoing replacement cycle. While some of our schools need renovations, they also need refreshed equipment and furniture. We will replace and install furniture and equipment to enhance items located at existing schools and new construction. An ideal learning environment also includes technology that enhances operational efficiencies and, most importantly, learning. We will purchase and implement systems, hardware, and services for learning and teaching, student and staff productivity, process automation, data utilization, enterprise security, and creating a robust network infrastructure.
So technology affords students to have a deeper level of understanding. That way they can acquire knowledge through interactive simulations and also video clips. Technology also enables the students to learn anytime, anywhere. So no longer are they bound by the walls of the school or the time of the school day. They can actually take learning with them through adaptive software and digital content that's available anytime, anywhere.
There's nothing more important than the safety and security of our students. To ensure their safety, we will upgrade wireless communications, security camera systems, and purchase equipment and vehicles for emergency response personnel. We will also enhance our visitor and volunteer management system and improve access control.
Some of the innovations that we've done here in Fulton County Schools have been to put parameters into place in which we've been able to infuse high levels of technology. Presently, we are focused on upgrading our security systems to be able to be very, very proactive in terms of monitoring what goes on inside of our facilities.
New buses help ensure our students make it to school safely and on time. In addition to new school buses, we will purchase support vehicles, fleet shop maintenance equipment, bus passenger safety enhancements, Wi-Fi hardware to support personalized learning, and an automated fuel management system. We will support capital funding of minor capital projects to help implement programmatic innovations by local schools. As good stewards of tax dollars, we will retire outstanding general obligation bonds and other construction bonds previously incurred for capital projects. As a result, the district will be debt-free at the end of the Capital Plan 2022. But how will we fund this? There are a number of options for funding Capital Plan 2022. One option is SPLOS, or the penny sales tax. The Fulton County Schools Board of Education has called for renewing SPLOS during the May 24th vote. So what is SPLOS? Let's take a look. In November of 1996, Georgia voters approved a constitutional amendment that allows local boards of education to ask their voters to approve a SPLOST, Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax. SPLOST offers school systems a revenue source to fund specific capital improvement projects for educational purposes. SPLOST is a pay-as-you-go system that allows visitors to our county to share the cost for funding specific capital improvement projects for educational purposes. Prior to 1996, the primary source of local revenue available to most school systems for renovating or modifying existing schools and the construction of new schools came from property tax and bonds, which placed the burden for providing adequate local funding for capital improvements directly on property owners. The Fulton County Schools Board of Education has called for a referendum to decide if our current SPLOST funding will continue. You, the voter, get to decide on May 24th. For more information on Capital Plan 2022 and SPLOST, visit fultonschools.org/SPLOST.
Much more entertaining than listening to me talk about it. I do want to highlight just a few things on the video specific to the Milton community, just so we can spend a minute about what's going on here in Milton. As you all know, school districts will always have a capital plan, whether it's funded by a 1-cent sales tax, bonds, property tax, whatever it is. It would be irresponsible as a district if we weren't constantly assessing what our needs are. And as you all know, we go through a pretty rigorous process in how we assess our needs in the 15 million square feet that we have within this district. Just talk about what is capital. I know it sort of hits on it in the video, but capital really is everything that is touched by a student throughout the day. It's the school bus they step on, it's the building they go into, it's the renewal of those buildings, the support students receive through equipment, whether it's science equipment, band instruments, those sorts of things. Those are all things that ultimately get paid through the capital fund, and this sort of clock represents all of the various categories that are funded by the 1-cent sales tax currently, and again, it's what the board has asked us to look at renewing. We have two pots of money. I know most of you know this. One is the M&O budget, which is our teacher salaries, it's custodians, it's our utilities, but it's not these categories. These categories are paid for through a separate pot of money. Specific to this area, you heard a little bit about the STEM-focused campus. Our goal here is to meet multiple objectives and try to be as cost-effective as possible. So what we're planning to do is reuse the old Milton High School site, which is quite frankly a underutilized asset in the community. We plan to go in there, and you can sort of see a schematic here, build essentially a campus environment. We're going to be looking for partners within the business community. Each of these colleges or academies that were mentioned on the video will have a building attached to it. The idea is build flexible space that allows flexibility in the future and flexibility today. Again, be cost effective with the construction. The students who attend here will spend the entire day here, so core curriculum will align to what they're learning in their STEM academies. So it'll be that real focus. It'll feel like a college, and it'll create that kind of environment. And that'll provide opportunities for kids who want to go directly to the workforce or directly to Georgia Tech. I mean, both options will be available to students who go through this campus. And we think there's going to be a lot of interest. We've been surveying the business industries, but we've also been looking at what students are interested in, and these are things that resonate with students. They will not have a traditional high school experience, the football team, the band, or whatever it is. Those wouldn't be offered here, but those the time really would be spent purely on the academic environment. We did also plan additional school or equivalent capacity. We know residential development is really kicking up again in North Fulton County. Currently, we've got space because we saw the boomers, well, about 2007, we stopped having as many babies in North Fulton County, so we've started to see a little bit of capacity at the elementary level, but we do anticipate some of that swinging back the other way with the new growth that's going on out here. Renovations specific to this area, I'll leave a list for you all that gives a detailed list of what's available, what would be provided on this program in terms of renovations. The single largest renovation project is Northwestern Middle School. It's hard to believe it's time for it, but those of you who have been around and watched that school go up, you know that everything that goes within the building has a life to it. Roofs, HVAC, mechanical, electrical. And so this is a fairly significant MEP type project that's going to renovate that building, bring it back up to the beginning of its useful life again. Lots of renovations. Otherwise, most of the other renovations are focused in on what we call warm, safe, dry. It's really the things that matter most. Hopewell needs a new roof. I know it's a fairly new school. We had some issues with the contractor, but we're past our warranty period. We do need to put a new roof on that school. And at Milton High School, believe it or not, I know that's a great campus, but when you build Cambridge, there are a couple things in it that don't meet the same standards as Cambridge High School. And this program is really focused in on providing these new opportunities to schools at these STEM campuses. It's also ensuring that every high school in our community has those same opportunities, that no matter what community you're in, Chattahoochee, Centennial, Cambridge, Milton, that those amenities are provided for all of our students. We talked about technology already. I won't dwell too much on this. Any of you have students in our district who have started the one-to-one initiative? Anybody in the audience? Some? No? I think we're just starting to roll out. But this just makes sense. This is the natural iteration of education. It's not about, we always say a teacher is the best one-to-one device. We know technology, you can't lead with technology. What we see it as an opportunity to augment what goes on in learning. And really, right, we're providing one-to-one grades 6 to 12, and it's moving in a direction. We buy textbooks already. We spent $20 million on a recent textbook adoption, and it was out of print the day we printed it and bought that. And so we've got to get smarter about how we're investing our dollars and making sure we're providing a tool that continues to expand with the student and also has the type of learning, tools, if you will, to really take students to their highest potential. That idea of continuous achievement that we have here in Fulton County. All the other things were mentioned on the video. I will just mention a couple things. The furniture and equipment, this is really all of the stuff that's capitalizable that teachers use in the classroom. It's the test tubes, it's the band instruments, it's the science tables, it's all of those things are paid for out of this fund. I know everybody thinks the state provides money for transportation and buses, but I think they bought 3 for us last year. And we need to renew our fleet at a rate of about 1 in 70, and that's taking the state recommended life of a bus, and we take 2 years longer on it. So we want to make sure that we're getting the best, getting our investment back from those taxpayer dollars and getting the life out of those capital investments. But regardless of that, you've got to replace buses at about 70 a year to keep the fleet current. And the video mentioned the debt-free. Again, three ways to pay for capital, as you all know. I know you're in this business too, so you appreciate that there's only a couple ways you can pay for capital. One is through you can levy millage just for capital, and we've done that in the past in Fulton County. When I first started here, we were doing SPLOST bond and PAYGO millage. We were doing all of the above. We've gotten to a place where that's not necessary anymore, but PAYGO millage is a possibility. If we were to execute this program, it's about 6 mils to do that. You can do general obligation bonds, but I think the board was trying to avoid the interest payments to do that. It's about $331 million, or $11 million in interest payments if we were to use GO bonds. And then there's the sales tax. This is not a new tax, so it would be a continuation of the existing, and ultimately the taxpayers of Fulton County decide. So our goal is to share this information as broadly as possible. The referendum is May 24th. Early voting starts on May 22nd. And with that, any questions you may have?
Okay. Any questions? Bill?
Patrick, what's the, it may have been in here, I missed it. What's the total projected cost of all these additions and new schools and renovations?
I've got a great one-pager I'll leave for you all that details sort of the big picture budget. Construction budget's about $550 million, which is about what it is every 5 years for us as a district. Total collections during the period are projected to be 900 and change, 900 and I think the projection says 976 million countywide for all of the categories. We think that estimate's probably high. That's a Georgia State economist giving us that estimate. What we don't want to do is overpromise, underdeliver. So we've set our budgets accordingly to make sure that we're executing a program that we can deliver to all the taxpayers.
Just to kind of put it in perspective, the technology alone in the most current SPLOST that we're in right now, the technology line item for us exceeded $200 million. Can you believe that? And it was for lots of non-sexy stuff like networking and things like that. I mean, I don't know about your house, but I think that probably everybody's had to upgrade their own router in their house recently. We were at really the same situation. There was no point in deploying in devices and to our students if we were going to overload the bandwidth. And so we had to spend a lot of time, attention, and resources on expanding the bandwidth and preparing our buildings to come into the 21st century, because the kids are already on the bandwidth on their phones anyways. So, I mean, we had to make sure that everybody would be able to get on board. So our technology line item continues to grow. It's shocking, but we can't have all of this information digitally communicated to the state and the federal government and other organizations and just down to central administration without having security. So technology is, I would say, taking up much more of our SPLOST certainly than it ever did, even 10 years ago. So between the school buses, the technology, the furniture, and the other various line items, playgrounds, et cetera, that are in there, that plus the construction takes you up to the 1 cent budget. Generally, we usually find that our wishes or our wants are about 20% more than the 1% SPLOST provides us over the course of 5 years.
So with increasing use of technology, are there offsetting costs as far as real textbooks?
We're starting to see those. It's interesting. The textbook industry is catching up slowly. It's a transformational situation here. I mean, if they don't, they're going to be out of business. But we're starting to see that transition to the e-versions. But you're also seeing that a lot of subject areas just moving away from general text. It's great for the teachers, of course, because it gives you the roadmap, if you will, for the curriculum. But more and more, there's lots of tools out there. And so it becomes an augmentation. But I'm telling you, if those textbook companies don't catch up, they won't be in business very long, because there's going to be disruptive companies that come forward in this industry and change it forever.
Certainly it's changed since I've gotten out of high school.
Me too.
I don't know the touchdown.
Go ahead.
Matt?
Hey, Katie, last time I saw you, I think the STEM school you're going to make for the old Milton High School was, right? You're going to tear that down and build a new one?
Yes,
Right.
that will be a total demolition and rebuild.
Right.
And when it comes out of the ground, it will look very much like a college campus. We will probably try to match the traditional architecture that downtown is featuring in downtown Alpharetta right now. But it will have a couple of buildings, from a high concept level, we'll have a couple of buildings that are the core, that every student has to take. But there will be a building devoted to healthcare. There'll be a building devoted to IT, and there'll be a building devoted to mechatronics. And then we'll also have a building that will house all of the kinds of uses that all of the campus will need, like cafeteria, media center. We're going to have to, certainly, if we're not going to have the other sports and stuff, I would imagine the physical fitness area would probably look significantly different than a traditional high school as well, because you would want something else to attract the students. Interestingly, I was last week giving a speech to some leaders of North Fulton, and there was a young graduate, 2010, from Milton High School. I think I probably shook her hand. But she was in this class, and she heard about the STEM campus, and she said, how many seats are you going to have? And I said, well, you're going to plan to have 1,500 seats. And she goes, how will you ever make a decision on who can go there? She said, everybody's going to want to go there. She goes, I would have wanted to go there in a heartbeat. So I think that we're tapping into not only a need for our students, but a desire for our students to have those real-world experiences, internships, apprenticeships, and have the kinds of experiences that really prepare them a lot more for the work world than maybe a traditional comprehensive high school does.
The old Milton, by the way, the old Milton High School would take a tremendous amount of money to bring up to a standard. Parts of that building haven't been occupied in the better part of a decade. And so we do think, again, this will be a more cost-effective approach. We're leveraging the land. You've got a Seward site. The footprint is about 60% of a traditional high school, so it's not as much space. And so we think the general operating budget will be less, too, than it would be to try to run a traditional size high school. So we think it's a better investment for kids. Gives that choice and voice to kids that we don't have today in Fulton County.
Okay, anybody else? Bill?
Just one side note, with an old structure that's on that campus now, and we've talked about that.
Yes, we have.
Any update that you could give me?
I could talk to you offline, but I have had a considerable number of conversations with Alpharetta City, and in fact, Mr. Regas and I just spoke of it last week. So let me give you an update offline. And
Thank you.
good news, I think.
Good.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, talking to Patrick and Katie, and, on one hand, the one thing, there's probably a lot of pressure on all of us here because of everybody wants to, with development, and everybody wants to move to Milton, so that we deal with. But on a good note, that is one of the main reasons that Milton and our surrounding areas are such a great place to live, and people want to live here and move here, is the quality of our school systems, and so we're really proud of that. That being said, I think it's very obvious that as they went through the presentation, and the money is going to be raised somehow, whether it's raising our tax rate or millage rate or the SPLOST. The nice thing about the SPLOST is it spreads it across Atlanta and all of Fulton County, and everybody pays as you go. So I truly think that's the best avenue, and I did tell them that I would certainly support a resolution. Obviously, be up to the council to ratify that, but supporting or approving them going forward with this SPLOST. So, anyways, I just want to thank you guys for coming tonight and sharing everything with us. So, it sounds exciting.
Thank you for having us this evening. We
Okay.
really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's good to see you.
All right, Sudie, if you would please sound agenda item number 2, and I'd like you to sound the item and then see if there's any public comment.
This item is discussion regarding community septic, and we do have 3 public comments and 1 to read the record. And the first comment comes from Ms. Laura Bennett.
I'm Laura Bentley, 2500 Bethany Church Road. On December 7th, 2015, our community voiced strong opposition to land use that increases density by utilizing community septic systems. Allowing a community septic solution is a bad idea for the following reasons. It facilitates homes on smaller parcels, greatly detracting from the very thing that makes Milton unique. If community septic was being considered as a solution next to our property, I would be very unhappy. The possibility of homes on significantly reduced lot sizes would greatly impact the value of neighboring parcels. Community septic most likely allows a density increase which financially benefits the developer but leaves Milton with an overwhelming strain on our infrastructure, which greatly impacts everyone's quality of life. Risk, and I speak from experience. Septic systems are manageable but fragile. For any of you with a house full of teenagers on septic, you know what I mean. Shared systems? I don't think so. The drain fields in a shared system will fail more rapidly than with our private systems. New space for drain fields will be limited due to small lot sizes. Where do you go to find new permeable drain fields when homes are built in close proximity? Finally, the community septic represents a liability to the Milton taxpayers. I'm fine managing my own waste system, but think it unfair for the rest of us to potentially bear this burden. Milton's hardworking staff has stated that Milton does not support community septic. I ask that City Council uphold this position. Thank you.
Thank you. Sadie, if you'll please call the next speaker.
The next speaker is Mr. Tim Becker.
Good evening. Tim Becker, 15625 Canterbury Chase. I'm speaking tonight in opposition to community septic. However, I'm not going to argue on the merits of the issue, as others tonight will speak compellingly about why community septic is a bad idea for Milton, and it is a bad idea. My objection is more fundamental. My objection is that the citizens of Milton do not want community septic. Community septic has been brought up many times and debated ad nauseum. And nothing has really changed since the issue was last raised just 3 months ago. Every time you have said no to community septic. So my question is, why are we here tonight? Well, the ostensible reason is that staff and the Planning Commission have requested council guidance on community septic. The real reason is that no is really never no in Milton. And everybody understands this. So staff and appointed committees are always left wondering what to do. Either they do what they think is right, hoping that council does not take them to the woodshed, or they do nothing, hoping for divine guidance from council. And I do not blame them. Both staff and the Planning Commission were poorly treated during the CSO debate and rightfully feel disempowered. The real truth is that community septic is being kept alive by special interests that have embedded themselves in our city government. These are the developers, the landowners, and the septic system vendors. They're all here tonight. They have the money, connections, time, and attorneys to wage this fight forever. It took them literally 10 years in Gwinnett County to get a conservation subdivision approved along the Yellow River. But they did prevail, and today 196 homes are being crammed on 50 acres of pristine land along the Yellow River, and not 1 square inch of buildable land was conserved. Environmentalism is merely a marketing scheme for these special interests. I cringe when I hear them misquote Randall Arendt, which they regularly do, by the way. So let's, this time, say no and mean it. Let's put community septic issues to rest once and for all. Let's listen to the citizens, and let's send the special interest packing. Thank you.
Thank you. Sudie, if you'll please call the next speaker.
Next speaker is Mr. Matt Benson.
is Matt Vinson, 105 Whippoorwill Court. I'm here I'm in support of community wastewater. You guys have probably heard before, I represent individual septic and community wastewater. I was Georgia On-Site Wastewater Association, which represents the septic tank, individual septic tank installers. I'm just the outgoing president of that, but I do operate community wastewater systems as well. So I have knowledge from all ends of this. And here to rebut misinformation that keeps getting talked about in these meetings. I was a health inspector. I work for a county board of health. I know permitting for individual septic. I work for a septic product manufacturer. I teach continuing ed to the health inspectors and the septic installers, so I know that business. I know community systems. I operate the system down at Serenity, which we've heard ad nauseum about because it is in the same county, so it's something that we can point a finger to and we know what and where that is. A lot of the issues that are being brought up are just not true, or yeah, absolutely, you can find one case of anything if you look for it. Community systems fail quicker. That's not true. They probably don't fail near as quickly because they're engineered by professionals like Andy here. They're monitored monthly. EPD monitors those, and we turn in reports, and there's enforcement action available if they do not meet the requirements set by Georgia EPD. Individual septics have no monitoring. It's up to the homeowner, and I dare you to try to enforce a failed system to get repaired. I drive by one every time I go to Serenity. You can get on Google Earth and see it 3 or 4 years ago in the Google Earth history. You can see the failure, and it's still failing today, and no one's doing anything about that one. Odors keep being brought up. That's a matter of operation and planning up front and operation. I operate a 400,000 gallon a day decentralized system on the campus at Emory University. It's inside of a greenhouse. There's no odors. So you can plan for that. You can operate around odors if that's an issue and a concern. As far as small lot and having room for repairs, you don't repair community wastewater systems on the lot. Everything goes to a large area where you have the abusers and the ones that conserve water all mixed together, so you flatline out the rates so you have a steady flow going into these systems on a regular basis. But the repair area is required by EPD, and that's there if you need it, and it's packed up. So that's part of the planning up front. Any other issues come up, I'm hoping this is a discussion tonight. I'm available to hopefully try to answer questions and shed some light on some of these unknown and some of these facts that have been misrepresented. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Judy, if you'll please call the next speaker.
Next speaker is Mr. Jack Linden.
Good evening. My name is Jack Linden. I live in 14810 East Bluff Road in Milton. I'm here to speak in support of community septic systems. You're probably all aware that over the last few years, the Milton Rose Green Committee has conducted workshops to try to instruct folks about how to maintain and repair their on-site septic systems. And I know from that work that there's a lot of problems with those systems in Milton. And I think that ought to be taken into consideration when one is considering whether to approve a community septic system versus the single lot septic systems that would be approved otherwise. The main thing I want to talk about tonight, though, is the issue about the obligation of the citizens of Milton to pay for any problems that would occur in these systems. I have here something I'd like to pass out to the council members if that's possible. This is a copy of a paragraph that appears on the front page of every plat that's approved in the city of Milton. It's titled Drainage, and it describes the responsibilities that the owner of the subdivision has to the city regarding those drainage systems. I won't read the whole thing. I don't have time to do that. But the short version is that this paragraph states that the owner of record releases the city of Milton from any and all liability and responsibility for any problems with the drainage features. The Director of Public Works may conduct any emergency maintenance necessary to remedy any condition that is potentially injurious to life or property. Such emergency maintenance is not to be construed as an abrogation of the city's right to seek reimbursement for those expenses. So what this says basically is that if I've got for example, a retention pond in my subdivision, held back by an earthen dam, and that dam fails, if the homeowners association decides not to repair it, the city can come in and repair it, and then charge the homeowners for that repair. It's the same sort of thing that would happen if a cell tower fell in the city. The city would have if the owner of the cell tower wouldn't repair the damage, then the city could do it, and the charge for that would go back to the owner of the cell tower. So the idea that the citizens of Milton are going to be held responsible for the financial obligations for this is certainly not true. Thank you.
Thank you. City, if you'll please call the next speaker.
Our next speaker is Ms. Julie Zonner-Bailey.
Good evening. My name is Julie Zonner-Bailey, and I live at 255 Hickory Flat Road. It's nice to see you guys. As you embark on another discussion tonight regarding community septic, along with many citizens, I request that you please prohibit community septic in the city of Milton. This issue needs to be definitively addressed once and for all. This is not a new issue, yet it seems to continue to rear its head every few months despite community members thinking that it's no longer being pursued. Community septic effectively is analogous with private sewer versus the density limiting individual septic tanks that have always been the rule in Milton. The proliferation of community septic in Milton would allow for higher density than what is currently allowed with individual septic tanks. Community septic allows a developer to bypass the 1 acre minimum. And in many instances, the undeveloped land in Milton actually yields a higher amount of land to each home due to topographical constraints and soil types. There is a real example on Thompson Road where the soil via percolation test on the 70-acre parcel only allows approximately 30 homes. Had a community septic system been allowed, it would have allowed 70 homes. That's 40 more than what would have been allowed otherwise. This was one of the real-life examples discussed during the deliberations surrounding the Conservation Subdivision Ordinance. And there, of course, are many more similar examples. The recent issue of the Conservation Subdivision Ordinance was denied 7-0 by each of you on December 7th of 2015 for a number of reasons, one of which was that the CSO would allow for higher density in Milton via community septic systems. In addition to the higher density that community septic systems introduces, in the event of failure or insolvency, they also present a financial liability to the city of Milton and thus the taxpayers. These private sewer systems do fail. The EPD said so, the experts have said so, developers have said so, and the city has said so. The EPD presented to the city of Milton at the Alpharetta City Center in Crabapple. The EPD stood before the city of Milton staff and the citizens and said, these systems fail, we don't have enough staff to supervise them, and we would want the city of Milton to be the trustee to take on that financial liability. They said over and over that they do indeed fail. We need to continue to listen to these folks, because when these systems fail, and they do, ultimately it would be the city of Milton that would have to step in, which means taxpayers would be on the hook for a developer's community septic system. The city of Milton was supposed to be free of expanded sewer, yet the allowance of community septic would put the city right in the middle of the sewer business. Those risks include bringing higher density to areas that previously would never have had higher density, the risk of failure, the city having to take them over, the risk of taxpayers having to bear the cost of those takeovers, health risks of failing systems on adjacent landowners, the list goes on. The city of Milton and each of you, as our individual and collective representatives, to date have recognized the liability of the multiple private community septic systems, and you've recognized and you've acknowledged that that risk is simply too great. Regardless of your individual views, you've recognized that the collective risk to us as a city and the taxpayers is too great. You've demonstrated wisdom on this issue, and many, many citizens are encouraging you to continue to demonstrate that wisdom on this issue on behalf of all citizens of Milton. You also have a fiduciary responsibility to prohibit community septic and therefore ensure that there is not a proliferation of community septic in Milton. Nothing has changed since December of 2015. and at the time when the denial of the conservation subdivision ordinance took place, except that the issue of community septic is coming back again in part because there's a rezoning request on Ebenezer Road that requests approval to introduce community septic so that they can have land lots as small as 1/4 acre on land that otherwise and currently is zoned AG1. Bottom line, community septic systems should be prohibited in Milton. They introduce higher density than what citizens want, and they introduce a huge financial liability to the city of Milton and taxpayers. The public health, safety, and welfare of citizens require the city to prohibit community septic. The majority of citizens don't even realize that this issue is back before you. This item was just put on the agenda last week, and we only just found out about it. Most folks assume that community septic is not back before you. This issue does need to be resolved clearly so that all citizens can recognize that we don't need to be on the standby for every meeting, for every week, wondering if this issue is yet going to come back yet again. This is the introduction of private sewer. It does bear financial risks to the city. We ask that you please now prohibit this now, take care of this so that we don't have the risks of financial liability as well as higher density. Citizens are looking for you to continue to have the wisdom that you've demonstrated today. Thank you for your consideration and all that you do each day. Thank you.
Thank you. City, please call the next speaker.
Our next speaker is Mr. Bernard Wolf.
Hi, I'm Bernard Wolf, 1000 Lackey Road in Milton. I did want to speak out about this in terms of what we've done in Lackawanna and also as a citizen of Milton. The main thing that we've heard is that the primary desire of people moving here, living here, is natural areas with trails you can walk on and be away from the sterility of a Ag 1 subdivision. Now, there are two ways, and I've listened to what people say, and these are legitimate concerns, but you need to see what type of technology is used in a community system. I'm in favor of a community system, but only the one that addresses the concerns we've just heard. Simplicity, something that's easy to maintain, and also very effective, and also doesn't produce odor. Our neighbors to the south in end of Cox Road in the Rocky Creek area complain of odor. That's a Fulton County maintained system. We also have septic tank failures that we've all talked about. The purpose that we're looking for in the proper, well-designed septic system is the opposite, really, of what I think the concerns are that I have too, and that's higher density. It allows us to use, in Lackawanna, when we do this, to actually use smaller lots. Why? Because if you use say a 1/4 acre lot or a 1/3 of acre, whatever, what you're doing is destroying less of the natural features of the property. In our case, it's natural woods. If I have smaller lots, it means we can have a larger area of absolutely beautiful virgin forests with trails. Our plan is not to use higher density, it's use lower density. There are data available, and I think y'all are probably familiar with it, saying that a house in a lot in a low density area, particularly if it's the one that people of Milton want, which has a lot of woods, natural area, is actually going to be worth more. As a landowner, you want to get more for your property, and this will enable you to do it. If you have a lower density, like a piney now, we're looking at about 0.7 to 0.79 density per acre, lower density. But what it does do is then increase the value of our property. More people are interested in moving to this type of thing, and it's more than that, preserving the woods and the trails that we have. It's kind of a win-win for everybody. Development costs will be lower. The visual impact will be significantly better. I'm really worried about the aesthetics. And I like to relate this to a friend of mine that inherited a painting from Renoir. Found it in his parents' safe deposit box. Well, he had 2 siblings. What should he have done? Chop that up into 3 pieces and distribute it among his people. It's all like King Solomon and the baby. Or keep it in the whole area and then they share it. I'd like to maximize the area that is unspoiled not cut that up, but have it as a community area where kids can go play in the woods, wade in the creek and things like that, instead of having to ask all their neighbors, do you mind if I come and walk in your backyard on your 1 acre lot? So that's why I'm for it, and that's why I think it's the way to go, but it should be the proper system, and I do know that Matt Benson described what has worked that I've seen. I don't know that much about it. I think it should be, vetted properly to address these concerns, but that's the way I'd like to go it's the best way for Milton to achieve its rural atmosphere. Thank you all.
Thank you. So do we have any more cards?
We do have 2 more comment cards.
I'm going to just, part of our rules is cards are supposed to be turned in at the time we call the item, and that's just to keep people from going back and forth. And once somebody else has said something, I did notice there's been 2 cards turned in. I'll look to the council if you guys would like to hear those 2 comments, but that is against our, different than our rules. But is council okay hearing those comments?
I think we've already heard a couple comments from people who turned their cards in after it was, so I don't know that. Yeah, about that.
Okay, so as long as we've got everything, we won't accept any more. And Sudi will go ahead and let you call this 2.
Our next speaker is Charlie Bostwick.
Charlie Bostwick, 230 Hammond Drive. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And thank you for taking up this topic and thinking through all the issues that are involved around it. I think there's a simple solution here, and that is to allow community septic systems, but to limit the number of homes to those that would be allowed with regular systems, so there is no increased density. You've got to have a great opportunity right now to make sure that you protect view sheds, protect trees, but not increase the traffic or the density in the city. There's ways to do this that's good for everybody, so I hope that you set that limit on there and allow these in a way that's good for everyone. And just want to point out there are good options for trustee where an HOA can be a trustee and the city doesn't need to take that on. And I want to remind the community that the CSO was denied mostly because it was written as a mandatory ordinance as opposed to an optional ordinance, not because of these issues. These issues were raised, and they're very good issues that should be discussed and should be solved. But as I heard the group that night, there were some things about the way the ordinance was written that everybody understands would be a taking and not good for property rights, and so that was a very good reason to deny it, and just want to keep the record straight as I heard it anyway that night. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you'll call the next and final speaker.
The last speaker is Andrew Lovejoy.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Lovejoy. I live at 4789 Broxbourne Drive. I've been to several of the meetings that you've had over the last 8 or 9 months, and just listening to all the comments and reading all the suggested CSO ordinance. I have to say that, to me, that sounds like a win for the folks who don't want higher density here in Milton. As I understand, the overall density would not be higher. It would just be putting more homes on a smaller piece of property, leaving a great majority of the property left undeveloped. As someone who designs water and wastewater treatment systems, I've permitted several facilities through EPD. Community septic systems fail. Individual systems fail. The difference is community septic systems are overseen and operated by a licensed operator in Georgia versus individual homeowners who don't understand what's involved with owning and operating a septic system. Furthermore, community septic system, when we design these things, we have to design it for certain percolation rates. In addition to the amount of land required to perk, we have to set aside 100% redundancy just in case in time, if the soils fail, they have a 100% redundancy, which isn't the case in individual septic systems. So I'm in support of the CSO, and frankly, I think that the folks who don't support it, I consider this to be a win for them. You know, it's a great option. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes public comment on this item. Sudi, if you'll please call the item.
The item is discussion regarding Croco.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for your willingness to discuss this situation. The reason that we have asked you to consider this once again is because of some of the misconceptions regarding the original voting on the CSO and the implications it had on community septic. A recent application brought this to the forefront once again, and it's important for us to discuss the fact that currently a system could be applied for, a 2 to 10,000 gallon a day system could be applied for through the county, and one in excess of 10,000 could currently be applied for through the state, and the city of Milton has absolutely no regulatory authority over these systems currently. I think that has been a misconception. And going forward, respectfully, I think the staff needs some clear direction from the council, as does the planning commission, on the direction that you want to go with this, so we don't continue to put these things before you and have the same discussion over. I've asked Ken, and he's come along as our expert, and I believe Ken has brought along his own expert, to hopefully answer some of the questions that we have regarding the system. So I thank you for considering this.
Okay, thank you. If there's any general questions in the beginning, you can ask those now, or ask Ken or Aaron. Joe?
Yeah, I just wanted to check, and Steve or Ken, either one of you guys, if you could answer this. First of all, do we have any laws or ordinances in the city that address, discuss, or prohibit or allow community septic systems? In other words, do we have something that's written today that would provide guidance in this area? Because I've heard citizens already talk about we've discussed it, we've turned it down, we've done all these things that make it sound like we've made decisions, and I just want to know, have we or haven't we? Because I don't remember any.
Councilman Longoria, I'll take a crack at that. Certainly there hasn't been much discussion of these sorts of systems within the confines of the CSO ordinance. But right now, I'm not aware of there being any.
No, I'm talking about something that stands alone, because when we talked about the CSO, it was the CSO we were talking about. It wasn't anything else. And so I just want to make sure that everybody understands that.
Well, correct. And my review of the codes right now suggests the Milton Code is silent on this. These systems, as the city manager just mentioned, are in fact regulated at certain thresholds by both the Department of Public Health, perhaps in Fulton County, and then at to get to a certain threshold of gallons per day regulated by the state EPD. I'm not aware of the city of Milton having any prohibition on the systems at all.
So you're saying that there are county and state laws that govern these things?
That's correct. That would in fact be the entities that would regulate and authorize those various systems depending upon the size of the system.
So lacking any specific laws in the city, and a property owner wanted to install one of these systems, does he somehow have to get our permission? Or because we're silent on the subject, is approval granted silently?
It's not granted silently. The applicant would have to comply with all the pertinent codes to which we do have in place. For instance, our land development codes and our zoning codes. But with respect to having regulatory authority to place the system itself, that wouldn't come from us. They would in fact be both permitted and regulated by other entities.
Okay, so us having this discussion I think is proper, and us trying to make a decision on this subject, since we've never made a decision on it before, I would also say is proper.
That's right. Because,
that was a rhetorical question.
Well, it is rhetorical, but I'll answer a rhetorical question. You assume the answer, and I wasn't able to. But one of the questions that I thought you might go there, and I'll just go ahead and say it, is do we have the ability to regulate in this area? I believe that we do.
Yeah. Oh, no, I was assuming that we did.
We did.
Yeah.
I think at this point, and part of this is clarification, because I think there's some thought that, since the CSO and the community septic systems are thought that they may be tied together, and that even though the CSO was voted, was not approved, that also meant community septic systems were not allowable. But the reality is, from your research, a community septic system, as it sits right now, can go through either the county or the state if someone wanted to do that. Is that correct?
We don't speak to it. We we don't address it, and there's no question that they were intricately intertwined. There's no question. But I don't believe that the city of Milton's failure to enact a CSO meant that we therefore implicitly also prohibited community septic. I think if the council wants to do that, the council needs to do it.
And I think that's the issue. The real issue here is if the city wants to allow them, yes or no, and then number two, who would be responsible? Then again, and then the real white elephant in the room is, does it really allow for? Is there any benefit to having a community septic system versus individual septic systems on the same exact layout? And when I say, does it benefit the city, maybe not individual homeowners? And then does it really allow for different development patterns?
Right. And those are all, of course, very valid policy questions. So. If I may, while you're thinking, just to my left and your right is Aaron Myers, an attorney from my office, and he is looking at some of the regulatory laws with respect to this. So just if you have a question, please ask me, and if I don't know it, I will look left to your right.
Ken, do you have access to our current code right now?
I do.
You have access to section number 50-184, item B?
Well, I can get there. $51.
50-184, section B.
Right, so that it does reference the phrase community sewage disposal systems, suggesting that it is allowed. That's true. It's not a statement of it is available, but it says that when other systems are not available, community septic systems may be used.
So we do not disallow it from that perspective,
right.
But it is allowed in the current code, as was decided on by the very first council, I guess, when they voted on this in.
Well, what it says, when in the written opinion of the Public Health and Wellness Department and the Public Works Department, a public sanitary sewer is not available or accessible, an alternative method of sewage disposal for each lot, or a community sewage disposal system may be used when in compliance with the standards of the Health and Wellness Department of Fulton County Sewage Regulations.
Okay.
It's one of those languages that looks like it may have come from Fulton County and has been inherited
Right.
by
That is in there.
I don't know that the city of Milton, though, has ever taken any action, one way or the other, with respect to that sort of language.
No, I don't think so.
So, further to that point there, this, I assume, was part of the code that was adopted back in 2006. Then.
Very, very likely. In fact, I would almost guarantee.
It's not something that was.
That's my point.
The
city of Milton, I don't think, has addressed this issue at all.
Right, it's been in there for a long time.
Well, I think the main thing is it sounds like that these community systems are, if one wanted to go through the permitting process with either the state or the county, are allowed. But that's got to be overlaid with our zoning regulations of 1 acre lots.
All of our other
So a 1 acre lot with a community septic system is really out of our discretion. However, if one wants to go with a smaller than 1 acre lot with community septic, then it's all our decision. Is that correct?
Right. When you take that on by way of another ordinance.
So the real discussion, I guess, is size, lot size.
Well,
minimum lot size.
And I say that because, in your opinion, is there an advantage to having a community system versus individual systems on the exact same layout? And when I say advantages, there may be to the resident because they spread the maintenance and whatnot. But is there any advantage to the city of Milton and just the citizens in general?
If the yield, if it's not a land use or density issue, then it's just a matter of how risk adverse the city is at that point.
That's my question: is which would be more? Where would there be more risk on the city an individual system or a community system, even if, there's a waiver or something from the HOA?
It depends. It depends kind of candidly how the ordinance would be drafted, if we're getting into sort of the CSO and kind of how we would draft that. But presumably, collective systems that fail tend to warrant a collective solution. So there would probably be folks looking to the city to assist. But that's going to be a function more of how the policy and the ordinance we draft. If we get that to that, we would have to just try and mitigate against it. This is sort of a risk mitigation exercise if it gets to that.
Karen?
The whole reason we looked at the possibility of doing community septic and the CSO, even though it did not pass, and I was not in favor of it the way it was written at all, is to preserve land. And I think we've totally lost sight of that with all this misinformation out there, and that people are trying to do this just so they can get higher density, and that liability for to the city, and that community septic equals private sewer, which my understanding is that private sewer means you've actually done something with the waste, and community septic is not really any different from your own private septic, other than the fact that you've got a bunch of the septic ones coming together. Nothing is actually done with the waste. It just goes in the ground just like the regular ones. But I think we've really lost sight of the whole reason we were doing this. And the whole reason we're doing this is to preserve some of what makes Milton unique. And it's really a shame that people out there are misstating facts and have lost sight of what it is we're trying to do, and that is to preserve the land and trying to come up with ways we can do it that don't necessarily cost the taxpayers money. And it just really bothers me that we've lost sight of that, and that, the way the CSA was written, the way it was mandatory, it wasn't looking at it on a development basis. I was very much opposed to it. But the whole idea of community septic as a way to maybe group houses together, I would not choose to live that way myself right now, but if someone wants to, and it helps by preserving acreage for all the rest of us to enjoy, I'm not real sure why we're opposed to it just because of something we're afraid of. And I'm really struggling with why this is such an evil thing when, like I said, the whole purpose behind it is to preserve the trees and preserve the land. But maybe I'm just not getting something.
I agree. And my concern, though, is a little bit different on this as well. Obviously, we have an applicant. Prior, when we had this initially, it was mainly a question of law and what we wanted to do with regards to why we were elected in the first place. And I campaigned as well as trying to do all we can to preserve the equestrian culture of our community. And I thought the CSO was a way to do that. But the thing I have here now, this is a different issue. This is where we have, in my mind, as much as we're talking about community septic, but we have an applicant that's actually made a request through our process, through the CUP process. And as we look at it, I think it's a little dangerous and something we got to be careful of. I'm looking at our city code right here, and he has, according to the law, the ability to get a community septic system. If we were to deny it based on that, that's not a good thing. He has a right to make an application based on what our current laws were at the time of his application. And that's important that as a city and as a council, we look at this, we have to decide that, we have to uphold someone's rights here according to the law which we decided on. And even this was a law that's been in place for a long time. So as we discuss this, I agree with you on this, but I think the issue might be a little different in that we have a concern coming up immediately that we're going to have to deal with. This isn't a question of whether or not we should in this particular case. This is a how do we, because we have a representative, or we have an applicant that has every right to make a request according to the laws of which he had at the time he made the application. That's the reality of the current situation. Now, long term is what are we going to do with that? But I think we have we need to direct our question to staff and Carter to say, if this is something that he has a right to do, how do we then make sure we do it right? And I guess that would be my question to you with regards to the reason why this was brought up. So.
Well, I don't know that I have an answer for you tonight on that. Certainly that's a bigger question that we would have to go through as we work through this process, that if it was something that we felt was important for the city of Milton and we wanted to move forward with these systems, it would be something that we would have to work through how we got there and the tools that we would use to make sure that it was maintained short-term and long-term. I think as we've looked at these systems in various locations, those that have worked have been actively maintained. Those that haven't worked have not been maintained. So from a staff perspective, I think we want to make sure that we had enough involvement, more so probably than the state, to make sure that the systems are not only designed but constructed and installed and maintained appropriately. So it's a pretty big effort, and one that we would certainly have to go through if we felt like it was an important issue for the city of Milton.
Okay. Now I would just address, that has been addressed, and if Ken, you need to clarify that, but an applicant, based on the time they submit their applications based on the code at that point. So any discussions we have now, or if there's any actions, it would not affect that applicant. Is that correct, Ken?
That's correct. That is my position. The applicant for land use gets an entitlement to the state of the laws that exist when the application is tendered, and although the city of Milton certainly has the right to change its laws, it would change them prospectively, and the applicant would have a vested entitlement to the state of the law as it existed when they applied.
Okay. Now, I would just say, my concern with community septic, and, you could tie that in with conservation subdivisions. I truly believe it's a good concept if we were starting from scratch and had 1,000-acre parcels and like Serenbe or other areas. I've talked to a lot of folks up in Tennessee and a lot of areas where they're very successful. And that way, if you can group and cluster, and again, as long as it's not mandatory, it's folks can choose it. There can be a win-win. But at this point, the city of Milton, we don't have a ton of large parcels. And every application where I'm seeing community septic, you're grouping the houses to where somebody's going to lose, whether it's the people driving by or if it's the neighbors behind them. If you move everything to one side, it's not like there's a big enough buffer. So, that's my concern too. Then is, like I said, if it's the same number of homes, the same layout versus community versus not, if it's individual septic systems, and let's face it, sewer is the best, would be the best choice for environmentally friendly, but we don't have that here in Milton. And ever since day one, I know when some of us, were part of the first council here, kind of the default was we were AG1, there wasn't sewer availability, and that allowed 1-acre lots. While that may not be the best solution, it has certainly kept Milton from growing quite like or looking like some of our other cities. So, my big concern at this point, when there's so few parcels left, taking a risk of changing something that, again, I just think, we're opening up Pandora's box. It's going to allow more, maybe not more number of homes if we, hold it back, but it certainly will change the landscape and possibly not for the better. So I just have a concern at this late stage in the game of doing that. I think there's several other things we've got working conservation-wise that we're trying to do, and I just, my concern of putting the liability, everybody says, well, you can have a waiver or something and, put it on the HOA or whatever, but the reality is if something happens, the city's going to be responsible, and so is the taxpayers, on an individual septic tank. If something's wrong, then, folks go stay at their neighbors until they figure out a way to pay for it and take care of it. But, anyway, Joe, I think you got a comment?
Yeah, actually, we can move on to something more. I think we've talked enough about the fact that we have certain abilities as property owners today. We haven't made decisions on this before, and this is really unfortunate because this is all about originally trying to provide something to the citizens that I know they want. There's no doubt about that in my mind. So let's move on. To the real substance of this discussion.
Okay, Rick.
Yeah, I guess
we've heard a little bit of misinformation. I know I've seen a lot of it written in the past, which to me speaks of trying to scare people as far as versus looking at the scientific data. I don't think we have enough right now when we're having this discussion, just as you said, Carter. I think there's more research you need to know to say, okay, what systems are out there, what's the reliability, what are the options. The issue of additional density, I think we've addressed that in zoning, and we could address that also by saying we're not going to allow more than 1 per acre. In fact, it may be, if you did the perk test, which I think the gentleman who actually had put together his application was suggesting to go less than he'd already done a perk test, and he was going to request less density than what was allowable under the 1 per acre lot. So I think we need to look at it, take away some of the fear factors and look at it and say, is there a way to protect? Let's say if we consider this, is there a way that you can require a bond? Are there different things we can do financially so we protect the, because nobody wants to expose the city and expose the taxpayers. I'm a taxpayer. I don't want to expose myself, but at the same time, I want to know if people are saying we want this type of a subdivision, how do we protect the view? So if you've got houses that are closer together, it's not something that's visible, so neighbors, everybody sees it. And I think that's a design standard that we could work on. But I think we actually need more data, and I think, Steve, that's one of the notes that I sent to you, is I haven't seen the data telling me, well, what systems are out there? What are the reliability? Is Milton so unique that this would not work with our soils, with our topography? I don't know those answers.
Well, I think as Bill said it many times, we can put a man on the moon. We could figure out a way to engineer a system that will work here. But again, I guess the real question is, you know, do we want to continue with 1 acre minimum lots or introduce different lot sizes? And I can say this as a, you know, I guess you'd call it, I don't consider a large property owner, but as land gets, you know, gets taken every day, closer and closer, a larger landowner. So, you know, personally, I would probably gain with community septic and, you know, conservation subdivision. But again, you know, from my perspective and what I hear from the citizens and the majority is they don't want this. So I'm certainly willing to stick by that in my position. So, Bert?
Ken, is the liability factor, that's my main concern, not whether they fail or don't. You know, like Mr. Vinson said, they can, they can't, anybody's can't. Is there any way to absolutely 100% insulate the city from having any financial liability on something that we accept, even if we're not the permitting agency?
Well, I will say this: there's words written on paper, and then there's the reality.
I want the reality.
Okay, so I will tell you, it is challenging to ever say that there is a 100% no ever possibility of any liability or financial responsibility on behalf of the city, simply because I've been doing this long enough to know that even if there's no legal obligation to do something, sometimes governments, if they see something that may affect the public health, safety, or welfare, or even if something that affects a large number of their interested constituents, may want to do what they believe is the right thing and to assist those individuals. I see it all the time. It's nothing bad. It's just what elected officials do sometimes, as they see a collective need and try to provide a collective response. Is there a way, however, to draft documents that basically achieve that? Yes, I think that there is. I think that there's ways to get to what Councilmember Moore was talking about, which is somehow building in enough financial security to mitigate risk, and that's kind of what I was getting at with Councilmember Longoria. Mitigation of risk is what we're talking about, and that depends upon how involved the city of Milton wants to be in this. And what I mean by that is since we've already discussed the fact that these are regulated at the state or the county level, and this council has not ever taken any action with respect to community septic, obviously understanding the CSO had them, but I'm talking about official action to say they're not allowed or we're going to embrace them other than the 2006 sort of holdover language from Fulton County. We have to decide that, and candidly, this may be the time, because if we have something in the hopper now where this is going to be the solution, then what is Milton's response going to be to that? Is the Milton response going to be, we don't want to fool with it, it's not our obligation, it's not our deal, it's not regulated by us, we don't want to deal with it at all? Or would the city of Milton want to craft conditions that attempt to, in fact, make sure that there is some financial bond or some sort of a sinking fund that the HOA has to pay into every year to ensure that there is some sort of a pool of money available if there is a failure? I mean, again, if we can just sort of use a hypothetical, for example, but I see this with respect to private streets. So sometimes they want to have private streets, and so governments will set up a sinking fund for maintenance of those streets, because we know that 20 years down the line, if the streets begin to fail, and there's not been some sort of a fund set up, that sometimes the entities will come to the city or county and say, take over my roads because they're failing. It's not a perfect example, but you get the idea. So there are ways to certainly set up those sorts of financial protections. Are they foolproof? No. You have a situation where those systems are set up and the subdivision gets 30% built out and then goes into failure, and there's never really a viable HOA that's got the resources to keep the sinking fund solvent or to make the appropriate contributions. But there's certainly ways that we could be methodical and systematic and try to protect as much as possible.
One of my main concerns is as much insulating as we try to do, having the financial responsibility in the end if one fails. I would like to say if my personal one fails, then I'd like the city to pay to fix it too, if I can. And that's not realistic. My other concern with this is that it's just a crack in the door. And in 10 or 15 years, maybe not tomorrow, but that door gets wider. We need this, we need this, we need that. So I have after thinking about it and meditating over it and all that stuff, I do have concerns that we're opening the door to something we're maybe not sure what we're opening it to.
What's been your experience? I know Forsyth County has some of these, correct?
Well, I don't know that they have many anymore. I know that probably in the early 2000s we had some, and the experience there was unsatisfactory, and they are now prohibited in Forsyth County. And if you were to ask me why, I would give you two reasons. One, I think, is that the experience some decades ago, and perhaps the technology was different then, was unsatisfactory. And secondly, it's because the county made an investment in sewer. And if you make an investment in sewer, community septic is not where you want to be, because you want folks on your sewer system, because that's where you get ratepayers and that's where you get funds to pay back your bonds. So there's really two reasons. One, the experience was not satisfactory to the government. And then number two is we wanted to emphasize public safety.
Karen?
I think if we do decide to go forward with this, I think it's going to be very important how the details of the ordinance are written. And I think that absolutely this shouldn't be a means to increase density. And everybody says it will increase density. I feel confident that we can write an ordinance that will not increase density whatsoever with this. We've also heard that you might suddenly now have 10 houses adjacent to your house. That's why I was against the CSO the way it was written, because it would just allow you that. I think with this, it's going to be very important that we look at the things that are important to our constituents, and that is, what is adjacent to the property? Who would this affect by having homes on smaller lots? And if it's adjacent property owner has a choice of having woods adjacent to them that have been preserved in a conservation easement that would never be developed, or having 4 houses on 1 acre lots, they may rather have the woods preserved and have the other houses on interior to the property on smaller lots. So I think we've got to look at all this on a case-by-case basis. This is not a one-size-fits-all, which is what the Conservation Subdivision Ordinance try to do. But we need to look and make sure that we're achieving the results that we really wanted to, and that's to preserve the land without there being a lot of liability to anyone else. I mean, we've had instances in Milton where we had to step in, and they were not at all related to septic or sewer or anything else, and clean up people's property. I mean, we spent a significant amount of money and time cleaning up property, and we ended up having to, I believe we put a lien on the property, and we ended up getting paid in full for what we did.
We got paid. I don't know that the city was totally, I mean, the city invested a lot of resources on that project.
Yes. But we did do it because it was what was in the best interest of the residents of Milton. Hopefully we wouldn't have that happen with this. Hopefully we could put things in place beforehand to avoid that. But, there's always going to be some risk with whatever you do.
That's right, and that's a great example because if there was any situation where the city did not have a legal obligation to act, that was one. The city acted because the city felt that was the right thing to do for the public.
For the public, right.
That's right.
Okay, Matt?
You mentioned before about the financial implications of this, and I look at this as a cost of doing business because ultimately, I mean, heck, we're about to put together a revenue bond for a raising tax prices between $150 and $250 per household in order for us to be able to buy land. That is guaranteed to be a portion of the city taxpayer dollars to go to an incentive to actually preserve land. Now, if we have a community septic system that does achieve the objective of preserving land, then you might have the possibility of something going wrong, but there's no guarantee that it will. So comparatively to what we're doing with the revenue bond, the community septic system actually has a chance of not costing the residents anything. We're just having fear language out there trying to assume that it all will. But the reality is that it may not, and we're already trying to raise taxpayer dollars to achieve an objective we're trying to do anyway. So the financial side of it and the risk management side, we can take implications to be able to reduce our risk. We do it anyway. We do it with stormwater drainage systems. We do it with cell towers. That's what we do as far as the city goes. We manage that risk. But I do know that the risk that is happening is that we have more equestrian properties disappearing in the north end of the city. And I've got another one since the CSO vote on Thompson Road. Gone. We can drive by it again and take a look at it. Disappeared. The one behind my house I've talked about is gone. There's more of them that are up for sale. So that is a reality. It's kind of like what do they say? You take a frog and you throw it in boiling water, it'll jump right out. But if you throw it into water that's cold and then you turn it up slowly, he'll stay in there and die. And that's what's happening. Our community equestrian culture is disappearing in front of us. So when it comes to making a decision like this, and I agree with you, we've got to be able to manage the risk to preserve that which is the best part about us. Unlike others, I'm not afraid of risk. But in order to do the right thing, in my mind. And if we talk about that financial implication, though, it's no different than what we're doing with the revenue bond. In fact, it's probably much less than what we're actually trying to impose on a vote that we're doing to the community for something that may or may not pass.
I have a question first. If you got a copy of this requirement that goes on the approved applications for development regarding drainage and the responsibility of the developer. And I believe we've been using that standard. Okay. Seems to me, if I recall, 3 or 4 years ago, we had an issue with drainage issue in Crooked Creek. And I believe we went in there and corrected that, and I think we were reimbursed for that. I don't want to strain your memory too much, but there's a reason for these requirements to go on approved development plans. Seems to me, Ken, the same language could be used for community septic systems or community sewage treatment systems. We're we're holding the developer responsible in cases where we have stormwater drainage issues. Seems to me the same language could be applied to community septic systems. Okay. Having said that, I'm on the same track with Karen in her first statement down there. I see it's either a misunderstanding or a lack of knowledge on the whole issue. But I sat in here one night last week where the Planning Commission had a work session, and it was on the green space bond. And several people, we have members of the Planning Commission here, and several people that were here last week are here tonight. And we're talking about all types of proposals of trying to preserve green space, trails, preserving floodplains, you name it. We went down the list. Good discussion. But I think there was general agreement here that, and I see a lot of these people here tonight, general agreement that we want to, one of the major things we want to do in the city is to preserve green space. I see a contradiction here. I think we have some tools in our toolbox, and one of them is the community septic system. We've seen plans presented here by Mr. Bostwick, Mr. Wolf, and there have been a couple others in the past that have really exemplified that initiative or that wish, and that's to preserve as much green space as possible. And the way to do it without cost to the city is put it on the developer. Let the developer take care of preserving green space. In this one tool that's available here and has been on the books for since we were born here 10 years ago, is something these developers who have submitted plans that would incorporate this tool would achieve that preservation of green space, open space, at no cost to the city. And I think there is a major misrepresentation, and we keep going back to CSO. And Karen hit on this point here a few minutes ago. I think everyone got the perception, or at least it was pushed out there, that we're going to put a group of 1 acre lots next to somebody's $1 million house out here. Well, one of the provisions of that ordinance was for several levels of review from the Planning Commission, community information meetings, going through, of course, going through community development, and ultimately through the planning or council here to come up with the optimum aesthetic, I guess, layout for those types of subdivisions. And by notifying the community, putting everybody on notice, so there's no lack of communication, everybody knows about it, everybody gets a hand in developing something like that. And I have to commend some of these folks coming in, some of these developers with plans that show probably some of the best design for layout of subdivisions or developments, as you would call them, by using this one tool that's been on the books for the last 10 years, and it's a community septic. I don't think enough people have spent enough time to really get into this whole situation, understand the impact that this could have really on preservation of green space. And that's my major concern here, is preserving green space. Certainly not at the detriment of adjoining landowners, let the landowners get involved in this whole planning process so it does not adversely affect adjoining properties. But it's gotten to the point here with the CSO, then coming back here again with this community septic system. It's pitted neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. It's probably the most divisive issue that's been out here. And I think we owe it to ourselves to all get together and try to solve this, understanding that we have tools here to address this whole issue and come up with the most ideal situation we can as far as planning the remaining open land that's out here in the city. And I think that's what we're all interested in. I think we want to preserve what we think we have here, and I think it's time we all sat down, same table, figured this out, and let's concentrate on what's really important to us.
Let's figure it out based on the facts, not based on fears and misstated information.
Absolutely.
Right.
I guess, question, today, do we have community septic systems that are in our city? How many do we have?
Well, you've got one up at Birmingham Crossroads that serves the Publix and the shopping center, or the retail or office development on the southwest corner. While they probably aren't specifically considered to be community septics, you've got large septic systems that serve the elementary schools, Summit Hill and Birmingham Falls. And those are the three that come to mind off the top of my head. Is there another one I'm missing?
I'm not sure about Cogburn Woods.
I believe those are
That's
all on
sewer.
Sewer. Okay. But I know Summit Hill and Birmingham Falls, they each have in the range of 900 students there every day. So in some terms in the city, 900, there are many cities in this state that have less than 900 people.
I guess as we talk about this, one of the things that comes to mind too is, have we even looked at the data? Have we contacted them to know, number one, what type of system they have, and also what are the facts as far as failures and maintenance? What do they do? I guess that's where I'm at on this whole thing, is I want to get away from the motion. Let's look at facts. Let's look at science so we can make a wise decision versus making it just upon maybe some misperceptions, or I'm not saying anybody's trying to skew it one way or another. I think we need to have facts to look at it before we can make a decision. And just to clarify, because I've read some notes and things implying that the council keeps bringing this up. The only reason we're talking about this today is because an applicant has come forward under the current provisions and said, we want to apply and we'd like to have community septic. This was not the council bringing this forward, saying let's revisit it, let's bring it back up. I think you brought it before us because we have an active application and it is allowed today. That's why we're discussing this tonight.
And I think to Rick's point, that is the case. And again, we've got to be, I believe we need to make a decision moving forward so that our staff knows, because, we'll have more applications coming forward. So they need some direction. A couple of clarifications from my opinion. I certainly see in, tie-in community septic and conservation subdivision. To everybody's point here, you certainly could you could make a nice looking development, certainly a great amenity for that development to have extra land in there, whether it's trails and green space and whatever. I think, being a realist, it's Matt mentioned the horse farms. I don't believe you're going to drive around and go, oh, that used to be a horse farm and now it's preserved because there's 50 homes in it or whatever, no matter what the density was. I don't think we're kidding ourselves if we think community septic and a conservation subdivision is going to keep the same look that we, if you've been here for a while, what you saw and what you appreciate is the look of Milton. What I see, technically, you don't necessarily have to add any density You could take 100 acres that you could put, and I'm just making up round numbers, 100 homes on it, 1 acre subdivision, or you could do a conservation subdivision or use community septic, and you could put those same 100 homes on half-acre lots and preserve the 50. And you could use that argument, but reality is, with the topo and the cost that it would to develop that land, that 100 acres, if you had to stick with AG1 1 acre lots, probably the economics wouldn't work out to where you'd put 100 homes on there. There may be part of that land that just, it costs too much, whether it's a natural barrier or water or whatever, to develop. So in essence, it could lead to more density if you've got natural barriers of economic cost to develop land. So I think that's the decision we've got to make. We've got to make as a council, and I respect everybody's opinion. Moving forward, staff needs to know, or we, and Ken, I'll look to you. Do you believe our staff needs to know that number one, council is supportive of community septic and developments that go with that, or B, they're not? And obviously, to Matt's point, there's an existing one that's already in the works, and I guess per Ken that would be grandfathered, so we're not necessarily talking about that per se.
That's right, Mr. Mayor. So just to kind of circle back where we started this conversation, I think that the city manager starting the conversation talked about the fact that we have, based upon the certain capacities, we have the Department of Public Health that may regulate them from 2 to 10,000, and then we have state EPD that regulates them 10 or over, and then of course Councilmember Kuntz mentioned 5184, which provides that again, this is a holdover from Fulton County, but that if their public sanitary sewer is not available, which I think would be fairly easily discernible, that a community sewage disposal system may be used when in compliance with the standards of the Health and Wellness Department and the Fulton County sewage regulations, which I am not in a position to tell you what those requirements are as I stand here. So to the extent that the City of Milton doesn't act, then that would continue to be the applicable regs. We would still be subject to Department of Public Health for 2 to 10,000, for state EPD for 10,000 and above, and presumably to the extent that we go down to the Health and Wellness Department and find out what their regulations are, they may have some play too, although I suspect they're probably going to default to the Department of Public Health regulations. So that's one option, is to do nothing. If we do nothing, of course, then when this application that currently is using community septic as its option, when it gets to you, presumably you may want to add some conditions with respect to this particular zoning that would be in the nature of amelioration of any potential adverse effects of that system. That's going to be up to you. Obviously, we would want you to make an informed decision if you choose to take that on. You may not. You may choose not to. But my only point is, so we've got this first one coming up. That's going to come up, one way or the other. We're going to have to deal with it. The other question is, though, does the council want to deal with it and add its own regulations to what is already out there? That's the bigger issue. So A, do nothing. B, go ahead and try to take this issue on and set forth some regulations, irrespective of whether you're doing it within the confines of the CSO. There's nothing magical about the CSO. You can address this issue outside the confines of that, or do it within the context of the land use category. I mean, there may be more options than that, but those are the three that easily come to mind.
Matt?
Another question on that as well. Last week, the Planning Commission voted to defer this based on the item of the question with regards to what the city was going to do with community septic. Now, it's going to go back before them on that, and according to what you said with this applicant, he has a right, according to the way the current laws were, to make this go through. Can the Planning Commission then deny, or should we as a city deny based on that issue? We can deny on any other issue, is that correct? But on this particular issue, are we as a city in a precarious position? Kind of like if someone were to, obviously there's certain laws with regards to HUD housing or whatever, what we can or cannot deny based on, right? And I just want to make sure that if we are going to choose to deny or accept this, we need to make sure that the applicant's rights are not hindered.
Right.
Based on that.
So long as you will allow me to qualify that subject to compliance with the Health and Wellness Department regulations,
sure,
the Fulton Department regulations, as our compliance with the state or public health department regulations. But with respect to if they comply with those things, I don't think that community septic system needs to be the reason for the denial.
Right.
But there's more to that particular case than community septic.
Exactly. And all the other land use regulations and development standards are fully subject.
It's a rezoning.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess Kent's given us, either A, do nothing, or make a decision either in favor or not. I may be in the minority, but I certainly feel strong enough that I would like to bring something forward to council. My position would be to not allow going forward in the future community septic. But again, it's up to the council if they would like, got others that would like to see something come forward.
And that wouldn't affect, I'm sorry, Bill, but that wouldn't affect the current application.
That's correct.
I would be supportive of that.
Okay. Bill?
To the mayor's point here then, in a second option there was not to allow community septic in the future. Since that's part of our code, what kind of action would that take?
It would take a code modification. Again, this would be I was looking at the non-media code, the 2006, again, the code no doubt coming from Fulton County. But you would want to take that off. In fact, in Forsyth County, it says community septic is not allowed. It's prohibited. I mean, something as short and sweet as that would get done if that's what the council wants to do.
And I guess, again, my question is that, I'm certainly willing to go forward with that. Obviously, we're not making any decisions tonight, but just a direction of, and whether you support or not, if there's others on council, there are at least 4 people that would like to see our staff and city attorney bring us something forward to make that decision. Yeah.
I mean, I would say it's again, I just think it's a bad decision for us to say we want to just eliminate a certain technology and its advancement. With regards to how we can keep our options available to do good things for the city and the citizens, I would not be in favor of striking this in here. Now, that doesn't mean we don't look at the risk factors and direct staff to understand what those risks are and how we would be able to handle that. But to strike it from here entirely, I think that does a disservice to our citizens. We've got too many people, too many opportunities to preserve land in this, and I think this is a tool that Councilman Lusky is that we need to have in our toolbox. And I share the passion that Councilwoman Thurman had as well on that issue.
Okay. Anybody else? Rick?
I guess just to restate, I'd like to see more information, because I don't think we've got data points. I mean, we've talked about this, but we haven't really gotten down to what are the facts, how could we protect financial liability. I think until you answer those questions, in my view, it's premature to just say we're just going to X this without having the facts or understanding exactly what goes with it. I guess another question, can we, as far as individual subdivisions and design standards, can we not, on an application, actually work with that as far as the layout, how that property lies, et cetera?
Right. So that's what I was thinking when Councilmember Thurman was speaking. So you're talking about more of a subdivision by subdivision design, so the protocol where there's a lot more applying exactly your vision to each subdivision as opposed to a one-stop. Everything looks perhaps the same to address some of the situations she had raised. Yes, of course.
Because I think that was one of the limitations when we had the CSO. It was so broad. I mean, if we had reviews, you get community input, but I think that's one thing. So what you're telling me is, yes, in fact, we can put specific, if we exercise and go through community septic, look at this a little bit more closely, if it ever was to be used, even like in this current application, we can look at the design standards of that subdivision, the layout, the topography, those type of things.
That's right. You could do that.
Yeah, and I'll just clarify, I certainly feel confident the technology is there, and the wording and all that. My concern, again, is the ability to actually have more lots than could be without it, or smaller lots. So I may be the Lone Ranger that wants to make a decision on this, and if there's not at least 4 folks that want to do that, I'll just have to respect that. So, Joe, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the way our ordinances and our laws sit today, that developers who want to explore this have an option of doing it as of right now. If the land that they're developing is zoned AG1, then there's not a density issue because AG1 requires homeowners or developers to limit houses to 1 home per acre. If it was zoned something else where the density might be different, then they just have that option. So I think that I would rather us discuss it, because I think if we need to put some kind of approval process into place just to make sure that it doesn't get abused, that the lack of having clear language doesn't get abused to allow something to happen that we never planned, I think that's my biggest concern. So,
and to Joe's point, can you clarify, Ken or Robin or Kathy, if if a property is zoned AG1 and you don't have the septic issue, if it's we're a community that would still hold 1 acre minimums, correct? You would have to have a 1 acre minimum lot.
Yeah, and I guess
right. So that's where to get into a little bit of, that could affect it there.
And I guess to that same point, in considering individual things, could we in fact require a perk test ahead of time, just so that you know exactly what the yield would have been on the property if it was developed as AG1 under our current 1 per acre for perkable soil?
Yes.
Okay.
So again, and that on paper makes sense, but you got to realize that a property that would perk and be developable X number of lots at no ceiling on the cost versus one that's a reasonable cost, it could allow more density. Okay. Anybody else? Bill?
I guess everybody's gone through this a couple times, and I guess Steve and staff is looking for some direction. And I think Rick, from my standpoint, has probably articulated the points that we'd like to have reviewed, and I think one of them dealt with this requirement, the statement that goes on development plans too. I don't want to speak for everybody, but that's what I was getting out of this.
Well, I guess the only question I would have, obviously, as Bill said several times, you can put a man on the moon. I'm sure the answer to the questions, could come back. It can be done. So then, that being said, then what would the next step be?
I do have a thought on that. Yes.
Sure.
Okay. So the issue that's coming before us is an applicant's request. And we have, the Planning Commission did a deferral in order to be able to see what the council wanted to do with regards to community septic. And the reality is that the applicant has a right to that. The real question is as a staff, if they do and if it passes based on something other than, everything other than their plan that's there, then how do we then go about working with them on their community septic? And I think the staff should be looking for direction for that initially. The rest of this, do we want to throw a whole bunch of teeth into this? What do we want to do with the way it currently exists today? We can start that process, and I'm okay with starting that and giving direction to staff that, but that's got to be 2 different items. I think we do a disservice to you as staff if we give you direction on one, but not looking at the immediate. And I think that we need to know, Carter especially, if this thing does go through or if it doesn't. If it doesn't, we don't have anything to worry about. But if it does, how then do we help the applicant according to his right to be able to request this based on the current law? Every one of us up here actually vowed to uphold the laws of the Charter of the City of Milton, the laws of the State of Georgia, and the laws of the Constitution of the United States. He has a right to be able to request that, and if that does then go through, what then we do to help them in that process? I just don't think we can say, no, you can't. Is that right, Ken?
Well, that's right.
So we need, so I'm unclear as far as how do we want to ask staff to get direction, and what is our intention to help the applicant if it is something that actually passes?
Can I offer just?
Yeah.
I don't mean to.
No, go ahead.
Just very quickly, a couple of questions that just come into my mind would be, number one, it would be of interest to me to advise staff to know of the interaction, the size of the system, number one, the interaction with state EPD or the Department of Public Health, number two, their recommendation with respect to financial security, number three, the size of the system, and what are the assumptions that warranted that size? In other words, what is the estimated use of gallons per day for that subdivision? I know that public utilities use a certain number of gallons, and I've also heard that other sorts of systems use different. Are we going to allow systems that have an expansion capability, or is that in fact going to be a non-starter, which I suspect I know the answer. But all of those systems would help, or all those questions would know me. What is the technology specifically? I assume that in developing these sorts of systems, there's as many different sorts of technology as the marketplace will bear, which could be many, many. Those are just the threshold questions I want to know to be able to advise staff from
Sure.
from a risk.
And that begins a great dialogue, because then the real question then at that, according to the rights of the applicant's process, then he's got to go to Planning Commission, and we as a staff should be able to give a good recommendation to Planning Commission so that they can make the informed decision based on the law as what it is and the information that we would have gathered based on the questions that you just asked. Right? So I guess my direction then would be to staff, would be to answer those questions that Ken just basically posed and figure that out in time for the next Planning Commission. So in order to advise Planning Commission on the applicability of the applicant's request according to his right to ask the question. Right?
I guess to your point, that's really where that's really where I was going, is I think we need to, we're going to have to ask these questions anyway, because if this does go forward, how are we going to protect against liability? If he's entitled to it today, we need to do more research than what we've got today. I think we need more data points. If I were to make a decision just to say no right now, it's basically without data, it's just making a general assumption. And if someone has put an application before us, I think we need to have some of the data points, and I think the Planning Commission needs to know the facts behind it too, so we've got a little bit more information, including how do we write, if this goes forward, how do we limit the legal liability of the city in this one application? I think that's something we have to address sooner rather than later.
We have to do it in time for the next
in my
Planning
mind,
Commission.
on the application that's in front of us is really not even pertinent to this discussion.
Correct.
It's, in my mind, Rick, it's not a failure rate ratio and all this, that, and the other. It's a land use decision and minimum lot size. That's what it boils down to, in my mind. Not a if it fails or if it doesn't fail. It's a, okay, do we want to have smaller than 1 acre lots? If the answer to that is yes, then it moves on down to those weeds that we need to get into. It's almost to me like we've a little bit got the cart before the horse, and discuss if we want to have smaller than 1 acre lots, and then you have an X or a Y or right or left to go after you determine that. That's my opinion on the application in front of us. This discussion, he's got a set of laws that he can do it if he wants to right now at 1 acre lots, and really doesn't even have to have our blessing at all. If he can get the permit from the state or the county, whomever the permitting authority is. So that's the issue on that application for us, is do we want to have smaller lots?
Well, like I said earlier, that's the real issue here. Whether, it really shouldn't matter to any of us and our citizens, if the liability is nil, and whether somebody's on community septic or their own septic system or sewer, if it's a minimum lot size. So
I don't know if we've done, I'm sorry to interrupt, but in a disservice to ourselves, our staff, and our people, do you have any direction?
Yeah,
have you been able to figure anything out from this?
Well, you actually brought me back to my original chicken or egg thing here. My next question will be, do you want to allow items such as the community unit plan districts to start to affect lot size? If we are going to allow that, then this, you're right, this may be a moot point, the whole community septic, unless the economics for the developers dictate that it would. I don't know which is the true issue here. And as you just identified, if it is truly whether or not we're going to allow the lot sizes to go below 1 acre, then that will give us the true direction. One or the other will help quite a bit. I was hoping not to discuss too much about the current project, but of course that was the one that spurred the conversation. But that of course also involves whether or not we're going to allow these types of districts to be able to reduce the lot size below 1 acre. So these are intertwined questions. They're not as linear as we'd like them to believe. But that will be my next question as to what do you want to do with this? And then of course as staff will follow your direction. But in the meantime, we're still in a little bit of a, you've helped clear up a little bit. Obviously, I'll speak with Ken about trying to get a lot of these questions answered. But I think we're still in a little bit of a limit.
Maybe I could throw it on Ken just to, what would you recommend for not only yourself but our staff, the direction that would be helpful tonight moving forward? And again, I know we're not deciding anything, but you can get, some feedback on which direction to bring something forward.
Perhaps, and again, perhaps since we have one that we have to deal with, we have to go through this process with one, perhaps that will in fact yield some of the information and experience that you then can have in front of you for purposes of deciding whether this is something you want to memorialize in some sort of a law form or ordinance form. So perhaps we could use this one interaction with this one developer to try and answer some of these questions in a very pragmatic way, because this is real sort of boots in the ground sort of thing. This is very likely going to occur, so maybe we can use this experience to further educate both staff, myself, and the council along the way.
Karen?
I think the issue is not just do you want smaller lot size. The issue is, are you willing to accept smaller lot size if overall density is not increased in order to preserve acreage within the city? So I think that's what it is. I mean, I don't think it's just allow smaller lot size is really the issue. The issue is, are you willing to allow smaller lot size if it comes with preserving land? And I think that's a very important part of it. It's not just without increasing overall density, because I think that's another important thing.
Matt?
And I agree. I think, though, a distinction, though, needs to be made, because I can see both sides on this. The thing I'm concerned about is that the applicant has a right to make the request according to the way he thinks that he should be able to make that request. And then he is allowed a process that is a due process for acceptance or denial. The smaller lot size, larger lot size is going to be a decision by the Planning Commission and Council. That is basically a reason for a justification for acceptance or denial based on that request. I don't think, though, and it's dangerous, though, as we have the deciding here of the community septic, for us to deny that right of a community septic at the application based on the current laws which he provided. So if we make an acceptance or denial basis on smaller or larger lot sizes, that is going to be a decision by the council. And I'm all for whatever the council decides on that process, but I just want to make sure from the applicant's perspective that we are fair to him with the community septic side, because he has a right to make that proposal in his request according to the current laws. So, it's very important that we uphold those laws, we allow due process through this, and I want to see, that process go smoothly. But the Planning Commission needs to know that. If they deny it based on community septic, then there's an issue there, in my mind. And they may accept or deny based on that, but if they do it based on smaller or larger lot sizes, that'll be their prerogative. But the applicant does have a right to make the request according to the laws that we had in which he made the application. And I want to make that clear.
And I think that has been discussed and clear, and also, I'm sure, Ken, your office, whether it's you or whoever's here, can make sure that as they're discussing that they know that's not an objective.
That's right. But does the council, Councilman Coons, does the council not believe that
Once that has been made clear to everyone and we've worked through this process, you've then heard from the developer, you've heard their description of the system, you've heard the information you get back from them with respect to the technology and the capacity. All of that information will be educational to the council. Don't you think that would put you in a better position to have the very debate we're having this evening once you've seen all that presented to you in an open session?
Well, I think it'd be great. I just want to make sure that he has, and the community knows that he has a right to make the request according to laws in which we currently have. There's many that would like to see that he doesn't even make that request, and that's not right for him. So we need to make sure that our due process is correct. If we get to a point where the staff's recommendation that the technology is not sufficient, for example, for whatever reason or however that is, and that'll be up to the process to help make that determination. And the applicant should know that we want a technology that can be proven to be efficient and effective. But in general, though, the general request in which he made has caused a stir that I think is unfair to the applicant. But the due process is in place for the reason for due process. And, and I just, however we deny or accept it, I think that we as a staff owe a due process to those that are willing to do business in Milton for efficiency and expediency, but at the same time a right for them to have their own risk of refusal or acceptance. Because ultimately that's what it is. But if we're not fair in that due process, we do everybody a disservice. And that's not why I vowed as a city councilman to uphold the charter of the city, laws of the city of Milton.
I understand.
Okay. Anybody else? So really, I'm not real clear if we have any direction or not. Ken, I think I heard you say, you could basically by default go through this next process and see where it goes there. Is there a concern, though, in the interim that other things pop up and get submitted that may not be what the council wants or the city want direction?
Of course, there's that risk. Yes, there is that risk. My only point was, from just a pure utilitarian standpoint, we are having to go through a process now. That process will yield information. That information will be provided to you, and that may make this debate, if we have it a second time, perhaps more meaningful and constructive as far as your long-range plan, because you'll have gone through it once, and you'll have seen this information and seen the yields and seen the technology and seen the outcome and contemplated the conditions that may be. So that was my only point. And so my takeaway tonight was simply to advise staff in my office was, let's answer the questions that I posed, see what those answers are, get them to staff, and then hopefully the city manager will know what to present to you. Sounds good to me.
Would it make sense, since the current application is under the current laws, if we're going to talk about this moratorium, we wouldn't accept any community septic type applications until we have a chance to discuss it further?
Excellent. Excellent.
I would support that, but I don't know, Bert, I'm assuming you would support that if you brought that up.
I would probably.
So, is there anyone else that would have interest in that short-term moratorium? Not hearing any, so.
I've been on the council for 6 years. We've never, ever had somebody present a plan to us like that.
That's right. I don't think the risk is
I don't
huge,
think the risk is that high, exactly.
But if you want to ensure that for the next set period of time, over and above what's already been put out there, then that's the option is to bring that up.
I think if you want to collect the data and analyze those data points, then that sure ensures that.
Yeah, that's fine.
I would support it if we could word it, not that a moratorium's in place to get rid of the community septic, but to look at it further and ensure if we do decide to go with it, what parameters we wanted to be included with it.
Right.
Could you do
that's
that, Ken?
very typical. I mean, while we're working on potential regulations to just put a halt, to maintain the status quo, to Councilman Longoria's point, since you don't see many of them, I don't think we're putting a lot of development in the city of Milton at risk. Could I prepare one and have one brought to you to make sure you're meeting?
Yeah, that's
We'll take
looks like the direction on that. We got a little direction there. Okay, anything else? All right, thank you. Sudi, if you will please call the next item.
Our city manager has requested that we move item number 3 to the end of the work session, if that meets with the approval.
Okay.
Actually solved the problem
Oh, got it?
that was caused the issue. go in order if that's still okay.
All right.
Okay.
The next item is discussion regarding street name for new city hall and naming of downtown Milton. Mr. Stephen.
Do we have any public comment? Okay.
And this is in reference to some of the communication that we have had regarding originally the naming of the street by City Hall, but also as a result of the recent public information we had regarding the way signage for what you would like to call our new developing downtown area. There's a lot of strong feelings on that in the community regarding what we want to refer to our downtown area as. And then additionally, the information that I believe was initially collected from you regarding potential street names. Some of them kind of got redlined by the post office, and there are some other issues with some of the other names, but I believe I forwarded you a list of potential names for your consideration. So the hope is just to have a short discussion on this regarding some direction you may want to go in, but there are definitely strong feelings on what we want to refer to our downtown as.
Would you like to mention those names?
Yeah.
Certainly.
Without laughing?
No, you want some of the names for the downtown?
I think the downtown area first.
What are the streets?
Right, there were issues. The historic Crabapple and downtown Milton have been the back and forth on that, obviously because of the history associated with the neighborhood over there. But there were names such as downtown Milton, downtown historic Crabapple, downtown Milton at Crabapple, things along different terminology along those lines, which I'm not doing justice in referring back to you now how people really feel about it. But it is it's something along those lines that we're going to be looking at as far as, at least from the public input standpoint from the meeting that we had. Obviously, there is more discussion to be had regarding that, and just wanted to start putting that out for conversation. We are going to need an idea of what you would like to.
You know, I'll just start throwing it out there, get everybody's opinion. You know, obviously Crabapple has been around for a long time in a name, and most people are familiar with. You know, and I have lived in Crabapple way before there was the city of Milton, so I know it as Crabapple, as a lot of some of the other folks do too. But I think the risk we take though is the fact that the entire city, you know, would start to think, well, why is downtown in Crabapple versus, you know, it's downtown Milton. So I would be cautious of that. I don't know if you guys have any, Karen?
Well, but some of us actually attended the Wayfair sign meeting the other day, and I think what came out of there was that we want to make sure people know that it is Milton City Center, but we don't want to lose the historic Crabapple identity also, and that's trying to marry the two is what the challenge is because you don't want to lose the historic nature of the Crabapple area, but at the same time, you want to make sure people realize it is Milton City Center that's going to be located there.
And I think that the balance or the hard part of tying those two together, and I don't disagree with that, is trying to maintain the simplicity and rural nature versus having something that's such and such at such, you know, that sounds like a subdivision name perhaps, you know. So I don't know how you marry those. That's the challenge, is marrying those together.
We have this problem basically in three areas. It's not just Crabapple, but it's the same consistency for Birmingham Crossroads as well as for Deerfield too. You know, we have our three commercial nodes, and so whatever we do for one, I think we ought to consider doing as well in a structure for the others with regards to the naming, because Deerfield's just as important as Birmingham, is just as important as Crabapple. We're going to have our City Hall in Crabapple as far as that goes, but I want to be consistent in how we treat the different areas.
You know, I would say probably the safe bet, you know, if something along the lines of downtown Milton, just because Milton, we're all, you know, as one city and all the, as Matt said, the different areas, that wouldn't delineate anymore, you know, for or against any area. But my thoughts, 1 out of 7.
You want the street names?
Sure.
To survive?
I think we need to come up with a new list of street names.
Okay.
Wasn't anything that jumped out to me.
No.
You want to hear what's left?
Sure.
Yes.
What's left?
So I believe any of these could be called Boulevard Drive, Parkway Street, or Walk. But those that survived were Cotton Gin, John Milton, Equestrian, Piedmont, Chicken Creek, Veterans, and Patriots.
No boll weevil.
Well, actually,
It was an option.
you know what? I just
Got run
noticed
over
there
on those
that-
ones. Really?
I want to know how John Milton survived, but New Milton didn't.
There was some issue with using Milton in the name. I don't know why.
But John,
but
John
John
Milton,
Milton
I'm
is
not
okay.
arguing, but John Milton was okay?
It could be, what Angela said, got from the post office was that it could be John Milton, but it could be a derivative of Milton. They were okay with.
The name, a proper name.
A proper name, yes.
So it couldn't be like, because we've got Old Milton Parkway. Okay.
New Milton's a good idea, isn't it?
I like New Milton.
And it couldn't be anything with crabapple in the
Could
name?
be West New Milton.
I don't know that we got that initially. I'm going to have to check back. I don't have the original list, but that went through. I only got the list that came back.
But it's coming off like Crabapple Road, so I don't know if that would have a problem.
It'd be like Peachtree.
Probably would.
Well, Crabapple Circle still exists out there, too.
Yeah,
Right.
behind the Shell station. Big pothole up there.
Well, I still like Equestrian Lane or Equestrian whatever, so that's just me because that's our logo is a horse, so it makes sense to me. Just my thoughts.
And Boll Weevil didn't get shot down per se.
Can we share
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
All right, what I'm hearing is maybe we dig some more for some names.
Certainly, yeah.
Okay.
Anyone out there got a name for us?
That's correct.
Because it's a thoroughfare
Circle
versus a
means
circle.
designate a closed loop.
All right. Anything else on the names?
Yeah.
So it's, get some input and maybe you get some more options.
I'd like to speak in favor of John Milton. We're talking about an historic area here. The name Crabapple has become, or is related to history and is historic in some sense. But John Milton was, or Milton County was named after John Milton, and we here in Milton have adopted that name based on John Milton too. So I like that connection with history, I guess, and if we're going to promote the history of this area, what better way to do that than to pay tribute to a Revolutionary War hero and the town that we've named after him.
Well, I don't disagree with that, and if the road was shot down with that, I would like to see us, calling our complex, John Milton Square or something along those lines as well, if that would jive.
Yeah. I like the sound of John Milton Boulevard.
Anybody else?
There's 6 homes that will be on this new road. Is it too onerous to maybe ask some of those folks that live on the road that would, if they have any strong feelings?
Get 6
one way or the
answers.
I think that would be easy.
Hey, everybody, whatever they might have something that make pop out.
Or just say if something along the John Milton line, is that offensive?
Okay. All right. Sudi, please call the next item.
Final item this evening is discussion regarding T-Splosh project list. Mr. Carter Lucas.
Good evening. I'll try to go as quickly as I can on this. So while there's been a significant amount of discussion here recently on the T-Splosh and when and how and if it'll even move forward this year, staff has been tasked with the project of putting together a list of projects to support some various funding alternatives associated with the T-Splosh. So tonight I wanted to give you a quick update on where we are with that, try to get some feedback from you on the list, not necessarily specific projects, but whether or not the buckets we've selected are correct, and in particular, if we happen to have missed any that you think are important for this particular project. So, a couple of different funding scenarios have been proposed. With an overall 1% sales tax, there's been a distribution discussion of either 0.5% of that or 0.75% of that. And you can see from this that the revenues that would be generated based on a population-based distribution, which seems to be the way it's going right now. So under a half penny, we would get roughly $24 million over a 5-year period. The 3/4 of a penny would generate just over $36 million over that same 5-year period. As Patrick mentioned before, you want to make sure that you have projects funded or enough money to do the projects that you propose on your list. And so the target that we've used from a staff perspective is to try and hit 85% of the projected revenue. So our target goals under either the 0.5% distribution would be a little over $20 million or a little over $30 million if it moved forward with the 0.75%. Problem is, our list of eligible project right now sits at $70.6 million. And you can see the various categories. You cannot see any categories in that particular slide.
It says category name. What's up with that? So we're supposed to guess which the green is?
So we've given you some buckets of money that you have to apply category names to.
Yeah. I like that.
One of them is about 90%.
That's it.
Yeah, that one looks good. Let's have some of that.
Well, I can tell you that the green represents trails and sidewalks. Okay. That might be all I can tell you for sure, but we'll move through this. Bridges, intersections, paving are other categories that we're looking at. So when you look at intersections was one of the top buckets we wanted to look at, representing safety at a number of different intersections. On this particular list, you can see that the red dots shown here are high crash incident intersections. The yellow dots represent congestion mitigation. And then the circles are ones that we have included under our T-SPLOST. There's 10 intersections that we've included as proposed intersection improvements under the T-SPLOST. The check marks indicate those projects which are either programmed or have already been addressed in some way or are in design or construction. So it's really the 10 intersections that are highlighted there, and I've got a list here for you. Those are the 10 intersections that are currently in our list under the T-SPLOST program. Bridge projects, another safety issue that we were looking at. Bridge projects that we've included here, the majority of these are trying to get rid of some wooden wing walls. The New Providence Road bridge is an alignment issue. It's also a component of our trail program that's being proposed under the T-SPLOST. Clarity Road, another old bridge. My guess is that given the funding that we have available to us, it would be probably one bridge that would drop off of this particular funding mechanism. Trail projects was another one that we wanted to look at with this. So from the master plan, we've chosen a couple of different routes that would connect schools, parks, activity nodes, those types of things, and then connect those loops to themselves. So you can see here from the various components, the pricings that are associated with that. Overall, I think we're up close to $25 million with what is proposed in this particular plan. Then roadway projects would be projects that are either new roads or widening of existing roads. And these projects were selected based on either projects that we know are coming up or projects that have been vetted through previous CTPs. In one case, the Windward Parkway widening is a project that Alpharetta has proposed under their bond. There has been some discussion with them about partnering on that. This would be the addition of a third lane in each direction on Windward Parkway from Deerfield out to State Route 9. There's a current project proposed by the North Fulton CID to bring a triple left off of Georgia 400 onto Windward Parkway, and that would come down and drop at Deerfield Parkway. This project would extend that all the way Highway 9, which is really a more logical terminus for that particular project, given the widening of Highway 9 that's currently proposed and underway. So part of our funding, we've proposed 0.25% or 1/4 of that project to assist with the north side additional lane. What they would essentially do is connect all the decel lanes on both sides of those to have a typical section more like North Point Parkway.
Are you saying on Windward we'd eliminate the decel lanes and that would become the third lane?
That's correct.
Okay. On Morris Road, getting back into that discussion, any more discussion with GDOT on helping us improve some connectivity over to 9?
There has not been. We'll continue to have those discussions. My guess is that it would not occur under the interchange program, but would be done outside of that through another funding source. And those funds could also be used to supplement any funding through the T-SPLOST too. That particular project, what's shown right there is the project as it is proposed under the interchange project. So the widening of Morris Road would basically be tapered off right after Bethany Bend. Our proposed project would continue that 4-lane section all the way up to Webb Road, which would then connect to the other 4-lane section along Morris.
That's
you
much
have,
needed.
What's the estimate on that particular project?
I think it's a little over $4 million.
And there is enough right away that we could actually build?
Yes, sir, we believe so. Or if not existing right-of-way, we believe we could acquire the right-of-way to do it.
And still have sidewalks.
Without getting into buildings. There'd probably be some signs and landscape relocation, but we've tried to avoid existing buildings and the large existing utility poles that are along that corridor.
That was something we asked Fulton County to do back when we were unincorporated, and they said that they would get to it eventually.
With the, not to stray off, but with the McGinnis 400 interchange, their hope is with the widening of Union Hill Road, that would be the path of least resistance for the folks that aren't making Milton the destination.
Correct.
That they would go east and then take up Union Hill up to Fowler Park or McFarland or however they're going.
That's correct. Their destinations were more on the east side of 400. Our concern is not necessarily from traffic being generated by the intersection going out, but traffic being generated by the intersection coming in.
The morning.
So heading from points to the intersection rather than from the intersection out.
Gotcha.
Based on their traffic analysis, traffic going out from the intersection tapers off and gets back to acceptable levels at Bethany Bend, which is why their project ended at that particular point.
But doesn't address anything in Bethany Bend between that point and Highway 9.
Correct.
We're going to see the influx of cars.
They've done a really good job on the east side of 400 of making connections from the interchange and widening Union Hill, McGinnis, those types of roads to create that network. And our discussion with them has always been that given the Highway 9 widening project, there needs to be that same level of effort and detail applied to the west side of 400. So those are the 3 new road projects that we would be proposing under this. And particularly the Morris Road widening and the Crabapple connector would be projects that would be vetted through our CTP. Unfortunately, our list is going to be due prior to the CTP being completed. So we're trying to move some of this discussion up. Kimley Horn is assisting us with our CTP as well as all the cities of North Fulton in the development of this project list just to make sure that we have the right projects on the overall project list. And then the final bucket that we have are basically paving projects. These would be corridor paving projects, with the exception of those last 3 or 4 where we've already done some along those corridors, but probably not as glamorous as some of the other projects. But I guess tonight what I'm hoping to get is some direction from you all about where we should focus our list and how to trim that down to get it into the buckets of money that we have proposed available to us, and if we've left anything off that we need to consider. Just to give you some idea about where we are with the CTP, this graph or this map represents those project areas that were identified in our MetroQuest survey as needing some attention. So you can see we almost can't go wrong in picking a project. There's probably a dot everywhere that we've identified a project. So we'll be trying to digest a lot of this information too as we move forward, but we're just really on two different time frames, with the T-SPLOS coming much quicker than the CTP results will be, if it in fact moves forward this year. So let me go back up. Well, my grand plan was to come back to this one to kind of discuss the buckets, but that's not going to work very well for me tonight. But given the buckets of the trails, intersections, bridges, road projects, and paving, are those the right buckets would be my first question. And of those, which would be the most important to us that we should focus on? And I know that's a lot of information tonight, and I don't necessarily need a final answer tonight. I'd like to get some input as we move forward in putting this list together, because it is happening relatively quickly, but certainly I can get this information out to everybody along with the specific project lists and dollars associated with those, if you'd like to take a look at those and give me some feedback over the next week or so.
Could you just do a straight line proportional reduction in each one of them, and what would that look like?
I can. Certainly can.
Personally, I think we need the ones that affect people's safety and quality of life are the ones that need to be taken care of first. And I'm not sure if that's the green bucket or the red bucket there or the blue one, but
that would most likely be the intersection projects. I'm going to go with the blue, since there's two blues.
Which blue?
What are the blues?
Light blue.
And I concur with that as well. I mean, intersection improvements we need those in a lot of places right now.
But I do like the trail. I like the circular or the perimeter type trails,
Right,
and then them
yeah.
connecting, because that's a quality of life.
Well,
That may be something in the green space plan.
When we were meeting with the consultants, that was one of the things I said, you got to put something in there that, the public feels good
That's
about.
everybody.
Paying some tax dollars for it.
And given the fact that we're currently working on the Big Creek Greenway connection and down in the area that's identified on this as the Deerfield Loop, we can work out from that some proportional dollar amount. I just have to go through that and see what makes sense as logical terminus points for those trail sections.
I guess that's my question on that. Where can we get the biggest impact on those trails, spend the least amount, and still get the greatest level of connectivity?
It looks like on that Deerfield, where you can tie in, if that ties into the Big Creek.
Well, it'd be one of the logical ones for sure.
That would be the place we would start. The other thing that as we look through this, constructability is going to be a big issue. One of the goals with this is to make sure that we have projects that we can deliver in a 5-year or close to 5-year span, so that hopefully there would be an opportunity to ask the voters to re-up the tax after the initial 5-year period. So we may find that some of these projects just fall out from a constructability standpoint. But if we're heading in the right direction, that's, I guess, the first thing I need to make sure.
Well,
Okay.
I guess
I think so.
I think so.
You got some.
I think to Karen's point there, that's probably critical. Pick out the high accident locations and work on them. That'd be a priority.
And we're pretty careful. What we ended up with those 10 intersections, obviously some of the highest accident intersections were already underway in one project or another. But what we got down to, I think, was those intersections that had 15 or more accidents over a 3-year period. So we've gotten ourselves down to where we've got some really manageable numbers, either with this T-SPLOS or with other projects that are currently underway. So let me go ahead and get some detailed information out to you so you have an opportunity to see the project list in total. And if you would, just please get back any feedback. If I'm missing something in particular, as quickly as you can, we'd certainly appreciate that.
Well, and I think, too, it's important to know where you can get the most bang for the buck, because I know right now that everybody can gets through the Birmingham-Providence intersection very quickly, it backs up sometimes south of that intersection with people trying to turn left onto Batesville Road. And it will actually back up onto Providence Road because you can't get through because it's stopped. And it may be that just adding a turn lane there would have very little cost and a big impact. So, I mean, little things like that I think you got to look at to see where you can get the most bang for your buck.
We have not proposed any improvements on state routes under this.
Right.
We would probably look to another bucket of money to try and do some of those types of improvements. But if you'd like us to, we certainly can.
Well, if we can get other buckets of money, that's always good.
Can we improve the state route if we pay for it? I mean, are they
We can.
typically?
We can. And we talked about some
They
operational improvements along the 140 corridor. And in fact, both Roswell and Alpharetta are going to be looking at operational improvements on Howes and Rucker Road. And that was really the first step in the previous discussion on the TIA. That was the first step to try and relieve some congestion along that corridor. I know Cherokee County would like to extend the 4-lane all the way down to 372, but we didn't feel like under this project that it would be either appropriate or enough funding available for us to do that all the way down from the Cherokee County line to 372. So,
Well, if they want to pay for it, I mean, it really benefits their residents more than it does ours. So if Cherokee County would like to pay for the the 4-lane, then
so maybe under future we'll look at operational improvements along that corridor. But
overbuilding.
Right now we don't have anything on state routes.
It's
their traffic.
Right, it is. It's their traffic.
All right.
We can always do the toll.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. That'll conclude our work session. If anybody else doesn't have anything.